Today on The Journey with Steve DeWitt.
We're not called to make final judgments about anybody. There is only one judge, and it is God. And the grumbler and the slanderer had better get a hold of that, because this passage says the judge is at the door. In other words, God will judge the grumbler. God will judge the slanderer. And you better be prepared for that.
Welcome to The Journey with Steve DeWitt, Senior Pastor and Bible Teacher at Bethel Church in Northwest Indiana. The words we speak about others reveal far more about us than we may realize. Today on The Journey, Pastor Steve returns to the book of James to confront a sin our culture treats as harmless. We'll discover why speaking against a fellow believer is a far greater offense than we think. You can also listen online at thejourney.fm. Here's Pastor Steve with the first part of a message from James 4 titled Slander.
Well, friends, today we return to the book of James and our study here. We are in chapter 4, and James is going to return to one of his favorite themes. James loves to talk about the tongue. And we have seen this, we have heard this, and there's so much that he has to say about the tongue and the words that we say. And since we know the Bible tells us that as a result of the fall, that we have sin in our hearts. Even as Christians, we have indwelling sin. And Jesus said, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. One of the big problems that we have, don't we, is with this. That thing right there causes so much damage. And so, guess what? Jesus wants to transform our tongues. And everything else about us, by the way. But certainly, the words that we say and the way that we use those words in our relationships and in our lives, and that's what James is going to teach us today a little bit more about, and he's going to talk to us about slander. He has said so much already, and we're going to add this to the list. Slander is added to the list that we are to be quick to listen and slow to speak. How well have you done with that since we studied it? We're to keep a tight rein on our tongue, chapter 1, verse 26. That our tongues reveal oftentimes discrimination that is in our hearts. That we all stumble in what we say, that little grace verse for us. Our words are very powerful and damaging. That what we say reveals our spiritual condition in chapter 3, verses 6 through 8. And then we're going to get to the sins of boasting, of grumbling, and of swearing. And so here is our passage now today, chapter 4, Verse 11, brothers, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? And then I'm also going to pull in chapter 5, verse 9, because he's basically saying the same thing. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. The outline here is simple. There's something that we're not to do, and then there are reasons that we're not to do it. The thing that we're not to do is we are not to slander. And then he's going to get into the reasons why we shouldn't do that, and that's going to be basically my outline here this morning. So, the command, don't slander, don't grumble against each other. So if this is what we're not to do, then we better know what it is that we're not to do so that we can make sure that we don't do it, right? Amen? You have no idea what I just said. I don't know either. But you better not slander me for it, is what this passage is saying. All right, so no grumbling. But here's the Greek word. This is one of these words. It's helpful. You don't need to remember the word, but it's helpful to see it. Kata is against, laleo is to speak. So the word here for slander is to speak against somebody or to speak evil against somebody, to talk them down. Other ways of describing it would include defamation, character assassination, belittling someone, veiled innuendos. Here's a big one. True statements that drag somebody's reputation down. And the reason I say that's a big one is that I think many of us probably have a kind of definition of slander in our minds, that slander is something that isn't true that I say about somebody else. In fact, 99% of people, if you were to have the courage, and I would encourage us as a church to have this kind of courage, to confront somebody who is slandering or gossiping and to say, that's slander and you shouldn't be saying that, shut your mouth. They're likely to say this. They're likely to say, well, it's true, right? Because if it's true, then it needs to be said. And if it's true, we have the permission to say it to anybody, about anybody, anytime. Notice the word. It doesn't say that we are not to lie about one another. It says that we are not to speak against one another, even if it's true. So this is what slander sounds like. Well, so-and-so, he's a such and such. Did you know that he did this or that? That's what it sounds like. Actually, probably with a little more scorn, or maybe whispering. Do you know so-and-so? Did you know that he did such and such? He's such a this or that. Okay, something like that. That's what it sounds like. Just to help you know when you're hearing it, I say it that way to you. So that's slander. Grumbling from chapter 5, verse 9. This is also an interesting word. It means to complain or to sigh. To complain or to sigh. You know how that goes, don't you? Somebody says something to you or you're around somebody and you just kind of do this number. And that is audible for a whole lot of words that you are saying to yourself about the person in your heart, aren't you? All summarized by, I had it this morning, in not a sinful way, of course, but I had it this morning. I was coming up Broadway to come to church this morning, and I was there at Summit Street, and there's no arrow, and there's a place to go around people when they're turning left, and so I was behind the person, and the light was red, and the light turns green, and then they turned on their left turn arrow, or the left turn signal. It's exactly what I did, and then as soon as I did it, I was like, oh, I am speaking on this in 15 minutes. That's grumbling. And grumbling is one of these words that it sounds like what it does, right? Grumble. That's what grumbling does. So that slander is when I speak about somebody to somebody else. Grumbling is when I speak about somebody to myself within me. I'm grumbling against them. Now remember the historical context here of this book. James is writing to a group of Jewish Christians that we saw at the beginning of the book. They had this hugely inflated view of themselves. They were filled with selfish pride. And guess what happens when people that are filled with pride get close to one another? There's conflict. And that's what chapter 4, verse 1 and following was all about. They had wars and divisions and strife and fighting. That's what happens when prideful people get next to one another. And when you have prideful people not getting along, what you also have is you have them talking about people to other people. They're slandering one another. Inside, they're grumbling about them. And they're speaking ill against them. So that's the command. We're not to do that. Thank you very much, James. But why? What is the problem with doing it? I mean, we live in such a slanderous culture. I was at the grocery store and I had been studying all of this and I'm thinking about illustrations and I'm standing there with my little food at the checkout and my eyes land on all of those trashy magazines and stuff that they have there, the gossip magazines and all of that. And I just thought, here it is right here. It's just all around us. And of course, in our culture, it's no big deal to talk about somebody. It's a national pastime for us. But James says this is not the way that the redeemed are to use their tongues. This is not the way that those that claim the lordship of Jesus Christ are to use their mouths and their words and their lips. And there is a reason. There's several reasons for that. Here is the big problem with slander. Number one, it reveals an inflated view of self. Look again at verse 11. Brothers, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. What is really going on when I feel the freedom to speak down about somebody else? What I am doing is I am saying that I am the arbitrator of when the law applies and when it doesn't. He says here, you've become a judge of the law. And we've seen in James that the law is kind of an elastic word here. He says in chapter 2, verse 8, he calls it the royal law. And there it is this law that we are to love our neighbor as ourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus called it the second greatest commandment in the law. And along with loving God, all the other commands hang off of those two. So here James says, so you think that you can speak against somebody else? Do you realize what you're doing when you say that? You are saying that you are above the law. And he basically says nobody is above the law. It's like in our culture. If we were to hear of somebody, a sheriff or a judge or somebody else that decided that they had the right to set aside the law and to do what they wanted to do, we wouldn't like that. There would be an outcry about that. Because in our culture, no one is above the law. And when it comes to the spiritual and the church and what God is doing, God has given us commands. He has given us the law. And there isn't one of us that have the right to set that aside. And yet the slanderer thinks that he does, or thinks that she does. In this situation, I have the right to set the law aside. And I'm going to tell you why. Because do you know what he did? This is too good. I've got to share this. The law wouldn't want me to be quiet about this. I have to speak it. I have to say it. I have to verbalize it. And so I'm going to set the law aside to do it. And I am revealing in doing that I have an inflated view of myself. You know, when you have a high view of yourself, it's easy to talk other people down. When you have a high view of yourself, it's easy to talk other people down. And that's what James is saying here, that there is pride. The root of slander is pride. And the slanderer doesn't realize that whatever they're complaining about regarding this other person, that what they are doing in their slander is a far worse offense before God. That is the duplicity of slander. The very thing that I am doing is worse than the thing that I am complaining about. So when you hear slander, here's the first thing is that we need to, or you hear yourself slandering somebody or grumbling in your heart about somebody else, realize where that's coming from. That I have a high view of myself, that I have pride. And when you hear it from somebody else and they're doing this number and you haven't got to those words that I'm encouraging you to say, shut your mouth. If it comes out too quickly and you can't get to those words out, know that this person is a person that is filled with pride. That's where it comes from. Inflated view of self. Secondly, James says that when we do this, we're demeaning the image of God. And I'm pulling this from chapter 3. If you'll turn over to chapter 3, verse 9, in this long section on the tongue, he writes this, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness or made in God's image. And we talk a lot about that here at Bethel. We talk about God's being made in the image of God, and you have to get this and understand this. So much of theology in the Bible hinges on the fact that we are unique in creation. And the Bible describes in Genesis 1 how that is the case, that when God created the pollywogs and when God created the elephants and when he created the stars and the planets and the cicadas, which I saw my first cicada yesterday. I was out on a walk and I heard this like humming sound and I was like, oh, they're here. And so I went back in the woods and I found the little shells and I was like, I want to see one. And then there it was, in all of its ugliness. They are not pretty animals. But when God created the cicadas, he did something different than when he created us. Genesis 1, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. We are made in God's likeness in the sense that when he created us, We are living beings like all the animals are living beings, but he placed within us a kind of dimension of himself. We are not God, but we reflect the character of God in the sense that we have a moral and a spiritual and an ethical understanding and desire that the animals don't have. Here you are today. I didn't see one cicada trying to get in the door today, going, I got to go to church today. I want to meet with God today. I want to know what God has to say. They're out there humming and doing their thing. They don't care. And the cows don't care. They're unaware of this. But we have this sense in us, don't we? This sense of eternity, as the Old Testament says, that God has placed within our hearts. And we have a spiritual dimension and moral understanding of the universe. And the reason that God did this is that he is a spirit. And so he designed us and made us with a spiritual dimension so we can have a relationship with the Spirit. And he designed us with a moral dimension so that we can have a relationship with a moral God. So we're made to have a relationship with God. He placed that in us. We bear his image. It is a glorious thing. And it's true for all of us. The children here bear the image of God. That little conceived child in the womb bears the image of God. And that is one reason that we stand against abortion, is that we see the inherent worth and value of an image bearer, no matter how small, how big, how old they are. They bear the image of God. And you do here as well, by the way. So this is why taking the life of an image bearer, Genesis 9 says that their life shall be taken. It's the basis for capital punishment. We all go, that's right. Boy, to take somebody's life, that's a very bad thing. There's a very bad punishment for that. But what about taking somebody's reputation? What about taking away somebody's standing in the community? What about taking away their position within the covenant community of the church? Some of us think very little about that. That's no big deal. And what James is saying is, oh yes it is, because you are speaking against somebody who bears the very image of the divine, of God himself. And the slanderer has little regard for the fact that I'm speaking against an image bearer of God. The gossip is the same. The grumbler, it's the same. This person is a bad person, and I'm going to tell you how bad they are, and I'm not even going to think about the fact that they are an object of God's love, and they bear his image, and Christ died for him too. I don't want to think about that because I'm having too much fun slandering their reputation. And James says, this is a high sin. This ought not be. If you want to know how God feels about it, I would encourage you to stop by the home of some people that you know, preferably with small children. And go into the house and say, hey, we're just here to chit-chat and maybe look around, see your place and all of that. And as you're getting a tour of the house and you're walking down the hallway and they've got the pictures of the children, select a picture of the youngest daughter and stand there and look at it and say something like this: that is one ugly kid. Boy, that's an ugly child. Wow. You know what's going to happen? You're going to be asked to leave, aren't you? And out the door they're going to send you. Why? Is it because they love that piece of paper that's in a frame? It's all it is a piece of paper with some ink on it. Is it because it's paper and ink and it's on the wall that they care so much about it? No. That image is a reflection of somebody that is very precious to them. So when you speak against the image, you are actually speaking against the inherent value and worth of the one that they love so much. And that's exactly the way that it is for us. We are made in the image of God. And so when one of us says, that's an ugly image of God, God in heaven's going, wait a second, he's in my image. Do you know how worthy I am? Do you know how valuable I am? That's a high sin. That is a high sin. I remember when I was in India. If you've been there, you know the national hero in India is Gandhi. He's everywhere. He's on their money. You drive around, he's on the billboards. You know, it's just posters of him everywhere. He's the national hero. So we're in Hyderabad, which is one of the more modern cities, one of their main cities in India. And we're kind of driving around downtown and just sort of seeing the place. And we drive in front of one of the government buildings. And there in front of the government building is this giant statue of a sitting Gandhi. There he is. It's like 20, 30 feet tall, huge statue, bronze statue. And as we drove by, we all looked at it, and we all were thinking the same thing, because the whole head of the Gandhi was covered with bird poop. White bird poop on the top of this Gandhi. And so I said to everyone in the car, I said, hey, look, it doesn't matter who you are, you still get pooped on, which we all thought was really funny, and so did First Service. And I will tell you, as a pastor, I take some comfort in that truth as well. But that's what the slanderer does. The slanderer demeans the image of God. Not the image of the person, but the inherent and God-given image of himself. And it denies the fact that this person is an object of God's sovereign love, that he created this person uniquely, that when Jesus died on the cross, this is somebody that he died for and stands in heaven loving and interceding for. That will be my brother and sister for all of eternity. This is a very special person, and everyone here is that. But the slanderer doesn't care. And when the slanderer is done, there's poop, verbal poop, all over the image of God. And just in case you think I shouldn't use poop to describe slander, I hope you're upset because it does disservice to poop. Number 3 is that slander denies God's right to make judgments. Denies God's right to make judgments. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? And I love this point. James basically is doing here what in our culture happens whenever you have a group of people together and one person is trying to make the decision for the rest of the group. There will be somebody in the rest of the group that will say to the one person in front of everybody else something like this: who made you God? You ever hear that in the workplace or somewhere? Who says you're the one in charge? If you're an oldest sibling like me, you heard this kind of thing oftentimes growing up from all the other siblings. Who made you God? And of course the answer is, I am the firstborn. Case closed. But inherent in that statement, who made you God, is an acknowledgement that there are some things that only God has the right to do. And James says that only God has the right to make a final assessment and a final judgment about anybody.
You're listening to The Journey with Pastor Steve DeWitt and the first part of a message titled Slander. You can hear it again anytime at thejourney.fm. Well, life is certainly a journey, and here on The Journey, our goal is to steer you on the right path with the unwavering, eternal truths discovered in God's Word. That's why each day, Pastor Steve takes our listeners into the depths of Scripture, making its truths easy to understand and applicable to daily life. Right now, he's walking us through the book of James, a powerful call to active faith in every season of the Christian life. The Journey is a listener-supported ministry, and that work simply isn't possible without friends like you. Call 844-7-JOURNEY or give online at thejourney.fm. And to say thank you, we'll send you Humility by Andrew Murray, a small but searching classic, just 12 meditations on the grace Jesus modeled when he made himself nothing and took the nature of a servant. Often called the finest book ever written on the subject, it's an invitation to find rest, freedom, and quietness of heart. Request your copy when you give today. Call 844-7-JOURNEY. That's 844-756-8763. Or visit thejourney.fm. And while you're there, join our mailing list to receive updates from The Journey. Just scroll to the bottom of the page and then enter your name and email. Again, that's thejourney.fm. Well, I'm your host, Tim Svoboda. Be sure to join us tomorrow as Pastor Steve continues his message from the book of James titled Slander. That's Tuesday on The Journey with Steve DeWitt. The Bible teaching of Steve DeWitt is brought to you by The Journey.